From his first meeting with Fidel Castro in Mexico in 1955 to his death in the Bolivian Andes in 1967, Che Guevara's revolutionary career spanned little more than a decade. Yet the handsome young face, gaze set firmly on the future, has lived on through generations. In today's imagination, Che remains a mythical, romantic hero and uncompromising revolutionary, selfless, dedicated, incorruptible, ready to die for his beliefs. Determined nature. Ernesto Guevara de la Serna grew up in the shelter of provincial aristocracy in Argentina. His personality was not forged in easy privilege, but by the fierce battle he waged against acute asthma. He was a very sick boy, his brother later remembered, but his character and willpower allowed him to overcome it. Guevara came to believe that all life was an act of will. Any task, no matter how daunting, could be solved by dint of enthusiasm, revolutionary fervor and unbending determination. Restless traveler. In 1948, Guevara went to Buenos Aires to study medicine. Restless by nature, he left his native land in 1952 on an 8-month journey of discovery and awakening. As he made his way north through South America, Guevara witnessed injustices that filled him with indignation. "I will be with the people," he wrote in the journal he called Voyage, Journey. "I will dip my weapons in blood and, crazed with fury, I will cut the throats of my defeated enemies. I can already feel my dilated nostrils savoring the acrid smell of gunpowder and blood, of death to the enemy." 1 year later, having completed his medical degree, he left Argentina for good. Anti-American, pro-communist. At age 26, Guevara arrived in Mexico. He had spent 5 weeks in Bolivia. Comrade. Guevara discovered that cause in late summer 1955, when he was introduced to a daring exiled Cuban rebel leader, committed to freeing his country from a dictator. The rebel's name was Fidel Castro, and he was planning to return to his native Cuba and take up arms. "By the small hours of that night I had become one of the future expeditionaries," Che later recorded. Castro's passion and Guevara's ideas ignited each other. "It was like Lenin and Trotsky, like Hitler and Goebbels, like Mao Zedong and Zhu De," journalist Georgi and Geyer would later write. Che distinguished himself, outperforming every Cuban while training in Mexico, despite his bouts of asthma. He was one of the few survivors of Castro's disastrous Granma landing, which the Cuban army had spotted. Che Guevara made his way to the remote Sierra Maestra, where he joined Castro and 17 other Granma survivors, the men who would form the core leadership of revolutionary Cuba. Jungle fighter. Che fought bravely in the mountains. He earned Castro's confidence and was the first rebel to be given the rank of Comandante. Marching on Santa Clara in late 1958, his column derailed an armored train filled with dictator Fulgencio Batista's troops and took over the city. Guevara's triumph would be the final blow in the rebel military campaign against Batista. He became a Cuban citizen, divorced Hilda Galea, married a beautiful Cuban woman, Aleda March, and began a new family. Oversaw prisons. Guevara's first assignment was to oversee executions at an infamous prison, La Cabana. Between 1959 and 1963, approximately 500 men were killed under his watch. Many individuals imprisoned at La Cabana, including human rights activist Armando Valladares, allege that Guevara took a personal interest in the interrogation, torture, and execution of political prisoners. Author. Guevara recorded the 2 years he spent in overthrowing Batista's regime in a detailed account entitled Paseos de la Guerra Revolucionaria, which came out in 1963. An English translation, Reminiscences of the Cuban Revolutionary War, was issued 5 years later. Popular but ineffective. Lacking any managerial training, Che was nevertheless named head of Cuba's central bank. Later, he became Minister of Industries. He called for the diversification of the Cuban economy, and for the elimination of what he called material incentives. Volunteer work and dedication of workers would drive economic growth. All that was needed was will. Critic of the Soviets. Guevara became disillusioned with the Soviet Union, attacking Moscow in every international forum. After Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev removed nuclear missiles from Cuba during the 1962 missile crisis, Guevara questioned Moscow's commitment to international socialism. He was also critical of Soviet insistence that Cuba continue to specialize in sugar. The socialist countries are, in a way, accomplices of imperialist exploitation, he told a gathering of Third World revolutionaries in Algiers. Era of World Revolution. Che's reputation outside of Cuba, among leftist intellectuals and the radical youth that called itself the New Left, grew by leaps and bounds. It was an era of world revolution, and Fidel Castro had declared his readiness to support revolutionaries in any corner of the world. Che was the most visible advocate of this commitment. Then, in October 1965, he revealed the contents of a letter he had kept secret. In an emotional farewell, Che had renounced all his official posts, given up his Cuban citizenship and left Cuba to fight imperialism. In new fields of battle, Che wrote, "I have fulfilled the part of my duty that tied me to the Cuban Revolution. And I say goodbye to you, to the comrades, to your people, who are now mine." International agitator. Che's whereabouts became an international guessing game. The London Times reported him in Legend and Liability. By the late 1960s, Cuba was increasingly absorbed into the Soviet sphere, and Che was becoming a liability. Unable to ignite successful guerrilla movements, he offended Moscow at every turn. After 6 months training in the mountains of Cuba, the now legendary rebel entered Bolivia disguised as a businessman, determined to turn the Bolivian Andes into another Sierra Maestra. In Bolivia, Guevara's guerrilla group, numbering about 120, were well equipped and scored a number of early successes. Then came a series of disasters. The U.S. government located the group and sent CIA operatives into Bolivia. The local population turned its back on the rebels. Bolivia's Moscow-oriented Communist Party reneged on a commitment to help him. Moreover, Guevara was being hunted by a U.S.-trained elite battalion of Bolivian Rangers skilled in jungle warfare. Bolivia. July, 1967. Che wrote in his diary. The negative aspects prevail, including the failure to make contact with the outside. We are down to 22 men, 3 of whom are disabled, including myself. By September, he was suffering from acute asthma, weakened by dysentery, and surrounded by the Bolivian Rangers. Cut off. Months passed, and Guevara received no word from Havana. The interesting thing about Che in Bolivia was that he was in the eastern high Andes, which are readily accessible for anyone who knew where he was. Fidel knew where he was, journalist Georgie Anguier, who investigated Che's death, has concluded. He could have sent someone up from Paraguay. He could have sent someone out from La Paz, the capital. There was no contact. Che is left wandering in this very high, wild jungle. Although Castro would deny any possibility of rescuing Guevara, biographer Jorge Castañeda authoritatively concluded, Fidel did not send Che to his death in Bolivia. He simply allowed history to run its course. Death of a revolutionary. The Bolivian Rangers captured Che Guevara on October 8, 1967, at a ravine called El Uro. The next day he was executed. His body was photographed on a stone slab in a small hut for the whole world to see. On October 12, an American State Department analysis of Che's death predicted, Guevara will be eulogized as the model revolutionary who met a heroic death.